appreciate that. I'll get the hang of this. So this is the work session for our budget, so I'll hand it over to you, Ryan.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is our third budget work session as we kick off our FY20 budget process. So I'll turn it over to Harpreet, and she'll be going over our 5-year forecast with me tonight. Give Harpreet a microphone.
David, you want to give Harpreet your microphone?
I don't know. It may fall.
Please.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Council members. Welcome to the first budget work session of the FY budget process. We are looking forward to working with all of you over the next few months to come up with a balanced budget for the city of Roswell. The focus of today's work session will be on the budget policy and principles, the economic outlook for the Atlanta, Sandy Springs, and Roswell area, the 5-year forecast for the general fund and enterprise funds, and we will end by taking a look at some important dates for this year. First, we'll start with the budget policies and principles. We maintain a reserve of greater than or equal to months of operating expenditures in our general fund, and the enterprise funds are required to maintain a reserve of 10% of unrestricted fund balance from the prior fiscal year. Revenues in the enterprise funds shall be 101% of projected expenses unless the fund has an outstanding debt. In that case, 105%. And among the principles that we follow, the general fund is structurally balanced. Current year operating expenditures are funded with current year revenues, and reserves are used only for one-time expenses. Moving on to the economic forecast. So based on the report prepared by Moody's, the overall economic outlook for the metropolitan area comprising of Atlanta, Sandy Springs, and Roswell for 2019 is positive, and we expect to maintain the current pace of growth through this year. Population is expected to continue to grow in the metro area, and as per Moody's, the permitting activity will continue to grow in 2019, slow down in 2020, and pick up pace again in 2021. Stricter immigration policy will hurt the migration of H-1B visa workers, which in turn may affect other economic indicators and slow down the growth of tax revenues. So this is a table here that gives you some of the economic indicators highlighted here. Actually, GIS team Patrick had put together a beautiful dashboard for this, but unfortunately the link is not working, so I won't be able to show that to you all. But this is the table, and as you will see from this table, for the most part, the GM, the total employment, the personal income, and the median household income, the rate of growth of economic indicators slows down in 2020 and 2021, and then it starts to pick back up in 2022 and 2023. So the general indication is that the economy will slow down the next 2 years before it starts to pick back up. Now this slide gives an overview of why we do a 5-year forecast. So just to give you a definition of what financial forecasting is, it is the process of projecting revenues and expenditures over a long-term period using assumptions about economic conditions, future spending scenarios, and other variables. A forecast can be used to provide insight into future financial capacity so that strategies can be developed to achieve long-term sustainability in light of the government's service objectives and financial challenges. And also, having a 5-year forecast is considered a best practice by the FOA, and it is also viewed favorably by the rating. So while in this slide, it is not in our 5-year forecast that I show you right now, not have capital expense capital expenditure included as part of it. We did meet with the department heads, identified capital and operating needs that will be presented at the end of the general fund forecast. So moving on to general fund forecast, we have two scenarios that we will be presenting today. This is the first one. And in this first scenario, we have kept village rate at 4.955, current approved rate as of now. The property tax projection for FY 2020 is based on 2017 digest values, and we have estimated for exemptions, appeals, and growth numbers that we provided. And based on these assumptions, this is what property tax revenues for the next 5 years will look like. So the green bars here represent the gross digest, and the blue line is the total property tax revenue. And as you can see, the revenue drops from 2019 to 2020 due to the new homestead exemption bill that was approved. In the outer years, the revenue grows, but it is not much, as it is grown by CPI, which is right now hovering at around 2% in all of the years, in the future years based on this forecast. And so this is what was proposed in the homestead exemption. That. Moving on to the next slide. So this is the sales tax revenues that we are forecasting for the 5-year period. And the assumptions that we made for this is based on the growth, personal income, median household income, and population for the metro area. And as you can see, we have grown the sales tax revenue by 1.5% 2020, 0.5% 2021 and 2022, and by 1% 2020 and 2020. For the other revenues and expenditures, all the other revenues except the sales tax are grown by the rate of inflation. The operating expenses assume the continuation of the current service level. The 5-year forecast numbers also include most of the maintenance capital projects that were as part of the 2019 CIP. And note that the one-time capital projects are not included in these forecast assumptions. This slide here is a graphical representation of the general fund revenues and operating expenditures under scenario 1, and illustrates whether we will be structurally balanced. And as the chart shows, our operating expenditures will be more than the revenues based on the assumptions that we have made, which means we will not be structurally balanced. But this in any way does not mean that our fund balance is negative. And you will see that in the next slide. So this chart here depicts the ending fund balance, which is the blue shaded area. The red line is the reserve by policy of 25% that we maintain as per our policy. And then the orange line is the fund balance above reserve by policy. So the fund balance above reserve is positive, as you can see in FY 2020 and 2021, but then drops below the red line in the outer years. We move on to the second scenario that we have on 5-year forecast. And here all assumptions stay the same except the millage rate. And in this second scenario, we have assumed a 0.5 mil increase in FY 2020 from 4.955 to 5.455, and then a 0.25 mil increase in FY 2021, taking the millage rate from 5.455 in FY 2020 to 5.705 in FY 2021 and beyond. So the increase in millage rate is necessary to achieve structural balance without any adjustment to the current service level that provides us. So this is what the chart will look like for the second scenario. With the increase in the millage rate in the 2 years, this is what the gross digest and the total property tax revenues look like. And as you can see, we see a decent rise in the revenues from FY19 to FY 2020 and FY 2021. and then about $500,000 increase in the out. So the assumptions for the other revenues and expenditures remain the same in the second scenario as it was in the first scenario. And this chart again here gives you a picture of the revenues versus the operating expenditures based on the fact that that is if we increase the millage rate in those. And you can see the variance, it shows positive. So based on the millage rate increase that is proposed in the second scenario, the ending fund balance will improve, and also the fund balance above reserve by policy. And if you look at the orange line, which depicts the fund balance above reserve by policy, this is significantly from 19 to 2020. And that is because the 5-year forecast of expenditures does not include the one-time capital expenses. Hence, the number is higher there. And so these were the two scenarios for the 5-year forecast of general fund. We will now move on to this next slide. Now, this slide is a summary of some potential funding needs, and this is based on discussions we have had with department heads to identify needs both for capital and operating in the short term and long term. And for the capital project, we have classified them into 3 categories: consulting, maintaining current assets, and a new or expanded asset. And so maintaining current assets basically are all our existing assets, but what we will need in these years to maintain those current assets. And then the new and expanded assets, anything new that add to our existing assets. So as you can see, based on this exercise that we did, for the short term, the total capital that we may need is a little over $35 million. And then the long-term needs is $71.6 million. And then we also have operating needs that came up. And in the short term, those are going to be $0.2 million. And then the long term would be $9.4 million. And then we also have a section for revenue enhancement. Now, this basically includes revenues from the hotel motel tax and what else? Yeah, and also the auto rental excise tax increases from that. Those are the things that are included in the revenue. And just to mention, these requests here, these are not necessarily budget requests. Some of these may be done through financing. That's something we would need to discuss. But these are not necessarily budget. Moving on to the enterprise funds, we'll start with the water fund. Now, this slide lists the assumptions we have made for the 5-year forecast of this fund. We currently have a 1.5% rate approved by mayor and council water rate that will expire in December of 2019. And we have applied that 1.5% increase to the first half of FY and 4% for the second half. So that is why you see the average of 2.8% in FY. And for the remainder of the forecast period, we have assumed a rate increase of 4%. In the forecast, we have also accounted for revenues from new growth and development. Operating expenses have been grown by half of CPI. And then the forecast also assumes an employee compensation increase of 3%. Based on the assumptions made in the previous slide, this is what the fund will look like for the next 5 years. The black line that you see is the ending unrestricted fund balance, and that continues to drop throughout the forecast period, even with a proposed rate increase of 4%, till it starts to kind of flatten out in FY 2024. Next, we have the solid waste fund. For this fund, the revenues are grown by 22% in FY 2020 and by 3% for the remainder of the forecast. and these rate increases were approved by Mayor and Council in 2018. Among the other assumptions, the operating expenses are grown by half of CPI, and again, for this particular fund, to assume an employee compensation of this year. And this is what the chart for the solid waste fund looks like for the next 5 years based on the assumptions that are being made. Starting in FY 2020, the revenues will cover the operating expenses of the fund. And in the later years, as the chart depicts, the revenues should cover both operating and capital. And if you look at the ending unrestricted fund balance, the black line, it drops in FY 2021. And that is because the department intends to make some investments in the transportation that year. So the line stays kind of flat years after that, then starts to rise in 2020. The last fund we have is the stormwater fund. The 5-year forecast for this fund is based on the assumption of a rate increase of 2.5% across the forecast period for both residential and commercial customers. The operating expenses again are grown by half of CPI, and the forecast assumes again a 3% increase for employee compensation. So with the assumption of a 2.5% rate increase over the 5 years, the ending unrestricted fund balance stays stable close to $500,000 before it starts to rise a little in FY 2024. So these were the forecasts for the enterprise fund. And now we will take a quick look at some of the important dates for FY 2020 budget process. We have a special call budget work session coming up on February the 4th, where we will be discussing priority-based budget. We'll have our consultant coming in to present to Mayor and Council, and staff will also be available. It will be from 12 to answer questions you all may have. And then we have a budget work session on February the 25th. That will be about revenues, and we will also discuss and benefit that. The next work session on March 11th would discuss capital and one-time capital. And then on March 25th, we would have the partner organizations come in to present their budget request. And on April 22nd, that is the date that we propose to present the proposed budget for FY 2020. And then on May 1st, we'll have a final budget where the department heads will present their budget request for FY 2020. And then we propose to have the first meeting on May 3rd and the second budget on May 28th. That is.
Thank you. Does council have any questions? Yes, Councilmember Tyson.
Just several things that I just want to make sure that I understand. And if you don't have the answer today, answering at any time in the next few weeks would be just fine. I noticed that on slide number 6, you've got net migration running roughly 90,000 people into the Atlanta, Sandy Springs, Roswell, Georgia area each year. Is that baked into our forecast? Our property tax forecast, for example?
Yes, so we have accounted growth in there in our property tax.
So when I move on to, I was looking at the numbers, and I had shortfall of $1.2 million in property tax between 19 and 20. And then an increase in sales tax of $400, which made $800,000 kind of negative gap. When I get to future slides, it's a bigger number than that. What happened?
Which slide are you looking at?
Let's see. So the first one is on slide property tax revenues, slide 10.
Okay.
So if you look at slide 10, you go from 27.2 to 26.
Yes.
So that's $1.2 of revenue that disappears. Then when you go forward to slide 20, where's the sales tax one? 13 here?
That's the next 11.
11. You get, you go from 25.5 to 25.9, so that's 400,000 favorable, right? So I should be 1.2 minus 400, I should be $800,000 off.
Right.
But when I get to the general fund, it goes, slide 13, from 74.3, 75.9.
Right. So now for that, the revenues that is here for the fund, it is that is not based on sales tax. There's also other revenues, for instance, your business license, and then a big portion of that, your insurance premium tax, which has been growing for the past by almost 300, over 300,000. So that is factored there as well. And then so there are a lot of other revenues which we expect over the 5-year.
Okay, so then rolling on to, gosh, we could go to 18. In most of these slides, we're accounting for inflation in 20, and I'm mostly focusing on 2020 right now, mostly because I'm concerned about the 0.5 millage rate increase, and I want to, it's part of your recommendation. I'd like, if there's any way that doesn't have to happen, I'd like to know, and I wouldn't want assumptions, conservative assumptions, to drive us there if they didn't need to. So when I looked at 18, I see inflation at 1.88 and employee compensation at 3, right? And I kind of wonder, are we doing that in any other places? Have we increased, because we should be increasing if inflation is at 3%, property tax revenues should be going up at that same kind of rate, right? And you're probably being conservative and bringing that back. So that would be a concern I'd have specifically on 2020. On 21 on out, it's a pretty big guess anyway. And that happens in a number of different places. So I guess what I would be interested in seeing is this is the conservative, want to make sure we get it right. What does it look like more realistically?
And I would
where
say,
things are balanced.
I would say, just to clarify, this isn't necessarily our recommendation, whether leaving it or whether increasing it. I think it's too early in the process to tell. We don't yet have budget requests that have been submitted by department. We're still finalizing our actual proposed revenues for FY 2020. So the effort in this exercise really was to, assuming all things stay the same, here is one way to make the general fund balance structurally. So I definitely want to make sure I emphasize that this isn't what we're recommending. It's just an exercise in putting together a few different scenarios.
I accidentally looked ahead to page 33. And then the final thing I just wanted to mention for the public is the enterprise funds. And make sure that everyone understands that the way an enterprise fund works is we've got a 5-year projection for each enterprise fund of the capital needs that they have, and that build up that fund so that when that capital need happens, you've got the money available. And that seems obvious to those of us who play inside the world of government accounting, but that's what happens. So you may see a great big balance, but I'll bet you that in the projection, there's a great big expense coming. And you mentioned one of those in one of the funds.
So if you go to the water fund, if you look at this, right now this forecast that we have, the 5-year forecast, assuming that they would invest roughly around $500,000 capital each year. Now this is for the water line replacements that are done, and we may need actually more than that. But just to make fund work right now, the department decided $500,000 number, just minimum water line replacement that each year. So those are the big investments in the water fund. And then you look at the stormwater fund. They have several capital investments coming up. The stormwater pipes, the culverts are in bad shape right now, and they need to invest to replace those culverts and those stormwater pipes. So, and right now they're projecting $1 million in investment. This is with 0.5% increase. So if we do not do the 0.5 increase, the black line, that the ending unrestricted fund balance, that would be going down rather than stabilizing, coming back up. It would have gone down. So,
And the point is, those $1 million are not necessarily just guesses. They have an idea. Each one of those is supported by a particular needed project.
yes, and not assumption, not just assumption. So this is the list of projects that the department has prepared that they have that they would need to work on in the future. That's what the numbers are.
Thank you.
Additional questions from council?
I also just wanted to point out in your packet, Harpreet mentioned that the department heads went through this exercise, sort of a brainstorming exercise to look at what are those potential funding needs that exist over the next 5 years. We've listed that out in detail in the packet. You can see we've split it between what are those short-term funding needs versus the long-term. Again, these are very high level. They haven't been vetted yet. As Harpreet said, these aren't necessarily even budget requests. It was just an exercise to help us provide a little bit of background, a little bit of context for you all as we think about the general fund forecast and what are those big items that could coming down the road.
Just one more question, kind of expanding on something that Matt asked about the population growth coming in. Get around $30,000 folks a year. Is that not okay? Is that, I guess, the cost of fences associated with that and cost of services? How is that factored?
Can you repeat?
I guess cost of services associated with population growth, in terms of fire and trash pickup and wreck and parks and things like that. Services that the city provides that increases with population growth.
So, we've not assumed our increases in the operating expenses based on population growth. We've grown that by CPI. So we've not necessarily factored in for the expense.
Well, I'd also like to point out there's going to be an offset because we've got the 2020 census that is going to make our population go up, which means that we have increased sales tax that'll come to the city. So the operating expenses are offset by the revenues. And the 2020 census, Ryan, I know we're going to start working on that soon, but when will the results come in? Then we have to negotiate with Fulton County and Atlanta. So
I think last time that wasn't resolved until
it took 9 years.
yeah. Okay.
Our part's resolved.
But that assumes that we're growing at a faster rate than other cities, so that's not necessary. That's something we'll have to wait and see.
Right.
So it could be 2 to 3 years after the census, 2020, 2021, where we would see change in our percentage of the Fulton County local option sales tax that we receive.
Those numbers roughly are similar to what we heard at the MARTA meeting, MARTA breakfast the other day. They're expecting roughly a growth of 90,000 people annually, which, if you think about it, that's one whole Roswell every year, and for the Atlanta metro area.
Additional questions from council? Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Well, it's quiet. So as usual, great presentation. Thank you so much. I appreciate all your hard work, and
Thank you.
we are adjourned.